So my movie is called The Babadook from 2014. If it's in a word or it's in a look, you can't get rid of the Babadook. Babadook, dook. It's written and directed by Jennifer Kent, and it's based on her own short movie called Monster, which I didn't know about till Duncan told me, and I watched it. But it's the story of a widow named Amelia and her son Samuel that is obsessed with monsters, causing trouble with the neighbors and peers in school. She reads him a storybook about a monster called Mr. Babadook who comes and gets you in your house. The creature starts to appear to Samuel and then to her, keeping them both from getting sleep. It slowly starts to take over the mother, driving her crazy. Or so it seems. She attacks Samuel and kills the dog, and eventually she takes control over the monster and locks it in the basement. Then she keeps it controlled in that basement. That's the quick version, because it's a lot deeper than that. But what I love about this movie is that it uses many of the typical horror movie tropes that we expect, but it's used in a very different way, and it's much deeper and more meaningful. It's very, very smart horror. We can, and I'm sure will, discuss exactly what the Babadook stands for. And watching it for the second time, it made these points even more clear to me. In fact, the Babadook himself actually appears very little in the movie, and less than I remembered from having watched it the first time. It seemed like it was all-encompassing. And when I look at it again, actually, it's very rarely even seen or mentioned or anything. So, and that was one of the things I took from watching it again that I thought was really cool. So, what did the rest of you think about it? I know Donna was not looking forward to a horror movie.
I can say with all honesty, I only fast-forwarded through 4 seconds. And also, fuck you, David. Fuck you for making me watch this film.
I agree. I do not appreciate the cockroaches in this film at all.
That was a little creepy.
At all.
As I was just watching this a little while ago, I was eating Chinese food, and I guess a piece or two of rice had fallen on my shirt. And just after the cockroach scene, I leaned forward and the rice fell off onto my arm, and I jumped.
Actually,
oh my God.
I'm glad you suffered a little. I'm really glad you suffered a little.
Mum and I were watching it, and then we paused it to go do some stuff, and she went outside and fed the dogs, and coming in, a gecko jumped on her head and then jumped down onto her shorts, and this was right after the cockroach scene. She screamed a lot.
Oh yeah, I mean, I almost screamed. I can't with my neighbors.
Yeah.
Did you like it though?
I did enjoy this film. It was really well done. Essie Davis is a national treasure.
And
her acting was phenomenal.
Game of Thrones reference. She played, Lady Crane, like the Cersei actor.
Oh,
yes.
I knew her from somewhere. Oh, okay.
And Miss Fisher, which is a kind of
Fisher.
Agatha Christie-esque Australian TV series.
Oh, is it Australian?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah.
That's why the movie has to be crowdfunded, because we don't have a BBC tax like England does. So the ABC was like, we do want to do this film, but we don't have enough money. And people were like, public, and it got funded very quickly. Anyway, but I did really enjoy it. It was very well done. The symbolism was really good, even down to the ending of her having to care for her grief. And that's how you move past it. And she is. Like, it's not like the Babadook was vanquished. It's still always there, but she now has to care for it, and that's what keeps it in control, which I really like. But then again, a child making weapons, I would have sent him to a psychiatrist a lot quicker.
Right?
Yeah, and it wasn't just a few small weapons. One of them actually did have darts. That's the big one where it's like, no.
And he brought
it's
one to
not
school.
Just like air quote weapons. It's actually, this could seriously hurt someone.
I was surprised that not only did they just took him out of school instead of, like, I don't know, sicking some authorities on them. Especially after, like, the car accident, see?
No, but
they did get child services come around.
Cool.
Yeah, they kind of came, looked around and said, okay, we'll be back in a few weeks. Like, even
We'll
after
be
she
back
says
in a
and they're
week.
and the kids on drugs during the day to sleep, like.
No,
it was also so very well acted. At no point did I feel like she was a bad mother. And a lesser actress would have done that. Like, you get the extremes of sleep deprivation and this effect that the Babadook is having on her is why she says these horrible things, and then she realizes, and as someone who has gone through some pretty extreme, like, sleepless periods, it was really well done. Like, she knows these thoughts aren't her own, and it's
Well, are
really
they?
fantastic.
That's I think a question we need to get to, but we'll get to that. We don't have to right now, but
Yeah.
that's an important question.
They aren't her own at her best.
Aren't they? Aren't they?
They aren't
but-
thoughts
At her
she'd
best.
normally have, is what you're trying to say.
Yeah, like, at her best, she would not think that about her son, but she wasn't at her best, and those thoughts do creep in.
But
I
that's
think
the point.
that's
I think.
what-
That's the point.
I think that's what makes it an amazing movie, and I think, like, rewatching this movie, I liked it even better the second time. I
Right.
think it's one of my
Ditto.
favorite horror movies because the horror isn't necessarily the monster. The monster's just like an expression of something
Right.
far deeper, and it's the horror of, like, parenthood and motherhood,
Right.
and
Exactly.
having to care for someone and having to love someone who you don't actually love and actually grow to slowly resent and despise, and like that little kid just screaming constantly. Like, it's an incredibly shot film. The
Right.
aesthetic and like the sound design is amazing because you get such an acute sense of like a slowly deteriorating perspective. Like the noise is relentless. The kid is so chaotic. She can never catch him. She can never get him to do what she wants him to do. The housework is piling up, the dishes, the cockroaches coming out of the walls. It's suffocating. It's like this. It's such a perfect representation of, like, again with the whole gothic thing, like this slowly deteriorating mind. It's amazing design.
Yeah, I agree. Did you catch, when you watched it the second time, did you feel like the Babadook was less of a presence or more the second time?
It is. It barely appears. I was horrified. It's a horror film way before the Babadook shows up. It's a
Yeah.
horror film from
Absolutely.
like the first scene.
Right.
She is going slowly insane.
Right.
Like when the Babadook appears, it's like it's a natural manifestation of what she's already experiencing. And I think that's an interesting question. What does the Babadook represent? Because it sort
That's
of
the key
represents a
question.
few different
a whole lot of
things.
things, I think. Yeah.
It's this sort of blank space that can't quite be quantified. Because the film, it seems to be very much about trauma, like this traumatic event happened and she can't deal with it. She keeps having these flashbacks to it. It's a very sort of unformed, undigested, unencoded kind of sensory experience that she refuses to acknowledge or
And we should
deal
point-
with, and that wound is sort of slowly festering into her life.
We should point out that's her husband's death, just in case anyone.
Yeah, and it's specifically tied to the child because they're driving to the hospital when the car crashes. He dies, and then later the boy is born, and she has to bring up a kid on her own, which she's definitely not able to deal with. And I guess postpartum depression, you could also see the monster as being that, and a whole range of things.
And anytime she looks at him, she has to see what in some ways he took from her. Because, I mean, you can't blame the kid for this, but if they hadn't been driving to the hospital to have him, then the father wouldn't have died. The husband wouldn't have died. So it's like, she has to on some level blame him. And I mean, she won't even let him have his own birthday party because she doesn't want to celebrate. It's so messed up on so many levels, like even before she starts to go, a little loony.
Jennifer Kent, the director, had a good quote where she says, I'm not saying we all want to go and kill our kids, but a lot of women struggle. And it's a very taboo subject to say that motherhood is anything but a perfect experience for women.
I was going to get there. I love that quote. Because I had my own feelings about what the Babadook was the first time I watched it, which was, about grief and depression and PTSD and all of that. But I think when you add that quote in there and watching it the second time with that quote in mind, you see how, I mean, it really is a lot of it, I think, not just grief, but her own feelings, her repressed anger at him, at the kid. I mean, we shouldn't blame, on Game of Thrones, and the Song of Ice and Fire books, is it fair for Tywin to blame Tyrion? But, that's a natural thing to be angry about. And I don't think she can help it. And then you add this, like, crazy out of control child that's loud and uncontrollable, and she's got to resent him and be mad, and on some level she probably wants him gone. I mean, not on a conscious level, and like you said, not on her best day. But, when we say the things she says to him, I think everything she says to him in the movie is sincere and real. It's just not a truth she wants to admit, and it's one she has to deal with and eventually does. I think she does want him to eat shit. She does want him to die. She is mad at him, and she's angry, and then she's guilty about that, and she should be. It's an awful, awful, horrible thing to think.
Yeah.
The thing is as well, I don't think she hadn't fully come to terms with her husband's death. And most parents, not everyone, but most parents work as part of a team, and she has never been able to. The whole time she has had him, it has always been a one-woman job. And I think he might have ADD or ADHD, which is why he acts that way. And obviously he has not been diagnosed. You don't think so?
Sorry.
You just think he's acting out?
No. Like where we see because it's very much a cold open, like he's been doing this Babadook shit for a while. Like he's been seeing the Babadook for a while. And we just, the movie starts when she starts becoming aware of it. And that's probably why it feels like horror from the start, because this kid's already been living in a horror film.
Of his mother.
And she's just becoming, not even that, because the Babadook in the film is an entity, like an actual thing. We see it. It interacts with the kid, and then she can see it, and he says he can see it on the car when she finally sees it on the car, kind of thing. So in the premise of the film, I would say that he does have some very bad behavior, but I wouldn't put any diagnoses, and I said Guy Pearce was ADHD, so I'm a hypocrite. I'm aware. Before anyone else points it out, but especially for a kid that young that is living with, trauma and not the best home life, because you even hear, like, in her conversations with her sister, she's like, I'm over his death. I never talk about him. I never bring him up.
Which means she's not over.
Because there's a difference between being over something and in denial, and she's very much in denial. So she's just kind of compartmentalized this horrible thing. It comes out in her dreams, so she can just carry on for her son. And her anger towards the mum for having to not, like, because she can't go to the gym anymore. She's like, that must be so hard for you.
I know.
How do you even survive? I just love that scene. I think that's fantastic.
It's such a great line, yeah.
Like, I feel... I know a lot of parents who have had moments like that where they just want to scream at other parents because they're not aware. Yeah, just like, and they are judgmental moms. Like, her sister has had a really easy time. And, she's like, oh, I try, but I can't even stand your kid. It's like, well...
What an awful thing to say to a mother,
Yeah, like, where were you...
Horrible thing.
But
get-go.
This kid
and that's why Ryan Reynolds...
Here's a question. So do you think that he was this bad before she started acting up, or do you think she's always act up and that's made him be this way? Because it is a fair point. I didn't think so, but I think you've got a good point.
I think it's meant to be ambiguous because he does start talking about the monster, but he doesn't start calling it the Babadook.
Until the book.
Until the book.
Until the book.
And he's obsessed with the monster already.
Well, I think what he's articulating is something that's happening in the mother. Like, he can sense this growing rage or this growing violence cultivating in the mother, and he doesn't know what to do with it. And he thinks it's something that's taking over the mother, and he needs to protect the mother from it. So I think it is, you could argue he's got behavioral issues, and that's what one of the teachers comments. But I think the film is meant to say to us that he's this way because his mother isn't able to deal with something, or is treating him in a way that sort of formed this behavior in him, and made him afraid of something that is irreconcilably a part of her.
Yeah, and his misbehaviors aren't misbehaviors in a sense that he just hasn't listened and he doesn't care. When he misbehaves, it's he builds more weapons because he knows, like, he feels like something is coming and he needs to be able to protect his mum. When he calls the next door neighbor, it's because he's afraid for his mum. Like, he is definitely reacting towards her. So I don't know if putting on, like, a diagnosis to him would help at all when it's reacting to the situation that he's in.
But it's also a result of her parenting, because we see him just acting crazy, irrespective of trying to defeat some monster, like when he climbs up on top of that swing set. Like the mother has not set she's not raised him in a way in which she's setting boundaries. She's just constantly indulging him.
And I don't think she's in a position to be capable of setting boundaries. You know, it's a horrible spot to be put in. Like.
So do you think the Babadook happened? Do you think there was some creature that she either summoned or something, or do you think it's completely in her mind?
The book is pretty good evidence that it's something supernatural. I don't think she made that book.
But it didn't come back after she burnt it, so it might... Do you think it could be her sleepwalking, potentially? Like, and then hallucinating? But in saying that, I do like the fact it's actually something there. And I almost think that, like, do you think it's the father's ghost? And because she had not processed it properly, he was acting out in that way.
A supernatural manifestation, whatever Tolkien says about allegory. Like, I think it is an allegory for grief. But within the premise of the film, it is a being.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is supernatural. And I think it is a being acting upon her. But I don't think it's a being that's come from anything but her. Like, it's not a monster that's come from the outside. It's a monster produced from her own grief and her own and all that.
Yeah, because as well, it only harms her son, and she harms the dog, really. It did nothing to the next door neighbor, even when she saw it in the next door neighbor's house, and when the next door neighbor came and visited her.
This was definitely a film I had to watch during the day, because when you did see the Babadook,
creepy.
And for a regular horror film, I'd probably have to fast forward through about 10 minutes, because I don't like jump scares. I don't like any of that crap.
And there were too many strange.
Sorry, Duncan, but it's probably not crap. But they've done so badly, and it's horror for horror's sake, and I really dislike it. But then the Babadook does it in a way where I only need to fast forward through like 4 seconds, because it's so atmospheric, and it's when you see like the shears come out, like I kind of need to turn my back, because I realize I have a corner that I'm not seeing in my room. There we go.
A lot of horror films, I mean, there's not too much of the monster. Like, it's quite it's quite sort of less is more. It is much more about atmosphere. You only see the monsters a few times. But in another way, the monster goes much further than other monsters in other movies, where often the monster appears, but then the protagonist will get away. Whereas here, you actually see this terrifying shot of the monster, like, entering her. And it's like she's infected with the monstrosity in a way, and there's literally nowhere to run. It's in her house. It's inside her. There is no escape. And that's frightening. And I think I did want to touch a little bit on the design of the monster. It is very much a sort of amorphous blob. You don't get a sense, and that works really well with the theme of trauma. The idea that it's something it hasn't been encoded into memory. It is this sort of psychic gap, this psychic wound.
It's not defined.
It's constantly bleeding out. But I think the design of the movements are really creepy, and I think Kent used this kind of stop motion technique where it's she's sort of capturing stills of the image moving and then sort of threading them together. So it has this really janky, creepy, artificial movement to it. And there's also a creepy moment where she's watching television and it appears in like a silent
a bunch of times
film or
like 4 or 5 times. 4 or 5 times it appears.
Again, when she's looking through the window and she sees it in her neighbor's lounge room, so that kind of, it's almost a cinematic effect, the sort of interposing of the image in scenes of otherwise normal domesticity. So it's adding this something that, like Gothic Australian texts, they refer to as the malice of the ordinary. And I think I like how a lot of the horror is embedded in really sort of mundane domestic things, like doing the dishes, and even the ritual of reading a storybook to your child. Like, it's something she does over and over again, and suddenly it's an aspect of horror has entered it.
Eating food and finding glass in it.
And what would that not be the worst kids book ever?
Like, it's not this spectacular kind of monster arriving. It sort of seeps in subtly through this kind of repetitive domestic thing that you don't even think about, and suddenly it's there.
Yep.
Whoever made that book is like the production person on it just did such a fantastic job, especially when like she slits her own throat and that.
Oh my
God. That was brilliant.
So good. And what you were saying, like with it popping up in TV and the more advanced that it gets, like I definitely do think it's a supernatural entity that has come from her, because when she's watching the probably didn't even happen, the woman that stabbed her son, and she sees herself in the window.
Oh,
Yep.
so creepy.
Right?
And it's a smile,
with...
and it's so frozen. Ugh.
Yeah.
Guys, did you notice with the Babadook, when it has its physical manifestation, its outfit actually looks a lot like what her son wears when he's being a magician, because it has the cape, the top hat, and he's wearing sequin gloves, but he gives his fingers a similar shape to...
That's a really good...
Ooh. Yeah. And
I like it.
The Babadook's face shape is actually quite similar to the son's face shape.
Huh. I did not catch it. Interesting.
And in the picture book, the wardrobe in the son's room, the features on it, they have some carvings on it that actually looks like the Babadook's eyes in the picture book. Yeah.
Interesting.
If you're a really clever one and you know what it is to see, then you can make friends with a special one, a friend of you and me. His name is Mr. Babadook, and this is his book. A rumbling sound, then 3 sharp knocks. Babadook, dook, dook. That's when you'll know he's around. You'll see him if you look.
Babadook, dook, dook.
We might read another one tonight, eh?
But you said I could choose.
This is what he wears on top. He's funny, don't you think? See him in your room at night.
Mum, does it hurt the boy? Mum, does it live under the bed? Mum? Mummy!
Okay, so I'm going to make the argument that the creature did not exist at all. My feeling, this I would not have said the first time I watched it. This is watching it the second time, kind of trying to figure this out as I'm watching it, like thinking through it rather than just experience. Like the first time I watched it, I just experienced it as a horror movie, probably how Sara and Donna did, you know. But this time I was really trying to look for like meaning, and I feel like honestly, it's all in her head. For one thing, I think she wrote the book. You know, we have the bit that she's a writer, and, you know, you'd argue, you know, you don't put things on the wall unless they're there for a reason. I feel like she's a writer, and they said, I want to get back to that. So I feel like she wrote this book. I don't know, you know, whether she did it sleepwalking or just she's, you know, blocked it out or whatever. But I feel like somehow she did. And that's why it came back, because who else would know that it's in the, you know, that it was ripped up in the back? I mean, yeah, I guess the creature could have known, but I feel like, and the thing that makes it clearest to me is the fact that, remember, she saw all the bugs coming out of the back, but then when the social workers look, it's all repaired. Like, I mean, she could have repaired it herself, but she was in the middle of doing that at the time, so I don't feel like because she even went back looking for it. Like, look, there's bugs in the wall. And so if she fixed it, she doesn't remember fixing. Or maybe there were bugs in the wall, but she fixed it, but she doesn't know. I don't know. But I feel like all of it, because when I watched it a second time, I noticed that anything the Babadook does is something in her head. Remember, it's all from her point of view. You know, we almost never see Samuel by himself. So it's not like we know that, like, the Babadook did something to her while she's asleep or while she's away or whatever. Like, it's all from her point of view. The car scene, all of that is her seeing it. You know, we know he sees it, but what is he really seeing? Is he seeing his mom? Is he seeing, you know what I mean? And I don't think there's anything in that basement. I think that she goes down there and she imagines it. And that's one of the reasons she doesn't let Samuel down there.
I think that's definitely a valid reading. It could just be all in her head, because there's several points where she sees something and then someone else looks at it and it's not there. So it's an unreliable narrator, or it's an unreliable subjectivity in that sense. It's just her going through that process and seeing those images to justify it. But I did want to just touch on the ending briefly. I think that's a really interesting idea, that you can't really get rid of the Babadook, whatever it means. You just have to learn to accept that it's a part of you, and you have to like keep it in balance, and you have to acknowledge, you can't deny
And
trauma,
feed it.
acknowledge something. Feed it, yeah. You have to acknowledge that it happened and it's a part of you, but that doesn't mean it has to define you.
Right. And I do love that you can see this many different ways, that all of us can look at it and get a different meaning, and watching it twice gives you a different idea. And I think all of our interpretations are equally valid, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, that ending is powerful, though. Did the rest of you watch the short movie, too, that it was based on?
I'm not watching more horror movies than I used to.
Well,
Yeah,
it's only
I'm in
like
that
9
boat.
minutes. So. It was only 9
It's
minutes.
scary. It's
No,
scary.
as in,
Right.
I watched A Walk in Fright, and then straight after it, I watched The Babadook, and I watched both with Mum. And after that, we're watching,
Right.
we went and we found a comedy Korean drama movie, and we're like, we're watching
Hey,
this.
you should have liked Priscilla in between.
No, I'd already watched the other two. I watched those two first, and then I watched those.
Ooh, rookie mistake.
Oh, such
I did
a
Wake
bad
and Fight
mistake.
first and say Babadook for last.
If you want the antidote to the Babadook, it's the castle.
Okay.
One thing that's in your notes that I actually wanted to mention just because it's funny is how the Babadook has strangely become an LGBT icon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know where that came from? Was basically Netflix. Netflix accidentally listed it somewhere as a, like, when you have your, like, if you're looking for women-based movies or you're looking for movies in horror, and for some reason someone accidentally tagged it as an LGBT movie, and someone discovered this online and thought it was hysterical, and all these memes started popping up of like gay Babadook with like, with his like weird creepy look and his hat and then like a rainbow flag or something. And I know at the time, having seen the movie, I thought it was hysterical just because it's so ridiculously bizarre and inappropriate that I was like, I love this. And I put that as like my Facebook profile picture for a while, and a lot of people did. And in fact, people showed up this year at Pride, like around the world, dressed as the Babadook. These like
Talking
irony.
about Pride, it is the 40th anniversary for Sydney Mardi Gras.
Yep.
Ah,
Talking about
Always-
Sydney LGBTQI stuff, and
always wanted to go.
yeah.
I don't think people are really seriously thinking it. I think it's just funny because it's so bizarre and inappropriate. And then I think it also makes fun of the fact that, like, there are these weird, and I think a lot of cultures have that where you take something and make it an icon. There's a lot of LGBT icons that maybe shouldn't be, but for some bizarre reason become it. And that's why I thought it was so funny that the Babadook becomes one, because it's completely ridiculous, but I kind of like it.
As Duncan said before, sequins make everything better. Sequins and rainbow flags might make the Babadook less scary.
Right. There was some meme about who was it? Some other.
Oh yeah, wasn't it the
character
Babadook and
skating.
the Babadook and It? Pennywise from
Yes,
It.
Pennywise, yes.
They're-
Babadook and Pennywise were a couple.
They're a couple.
How did that happen?
Well, I
Why?
suppose.
Just a meme that's funny.
Shits and
continuing.
giggles? Okay,
Yes,
just shits
totally.
and giggles. Cool.
Oh no, totally. The whole. I mean, no, this was a huge meme. Like for like 2 years, for like a year and a half, it became like a big thing because everyone just thought it was funny and bizarre. Especially with the way the Babadook looks, because it's such a bizarre, and you got to give them credit too. Very creatively drawn, and the look of it is very unmistakable. I think the Babadook on some levels will become like a horror icon.
After watching all these Australian films, they all just have so much to do with community that you create, community that you find yourself in, family that you create, that you're forced to have, like in Strictly Ballroom. She doesn't appreciate, that's wrong. Her father doesn't appreciate her until that, so she's forced to be in a family that doesn't feel loving and all that kind of thing. And there's so much about isolation and loneliness as well, which is interesting.
In all four of these movies. In all four of them.
Yeah. that was my takeaway.
Themes. Overarching themes.
Oh yeah, I feel proud.
One quick weird note about this movie, by the way, is that in just on a meta level, not in the movie itself, but in America, they actually released the movie online the same day that it was put into theaters. And it was mostly in like smaller, like art house theaters, but they actually released it online the same day, which is an interesting distribution idea to be like, well, if you want to just watch it now, you can. You don't have to go to the theater. And apparently it did pretty well. It didn't do like great in the theaters, but it probably made a good amount of money online, and a lot of people have watched it. So
Yeah, it's very much a word of mouth kind of movie. Like people, so a few people watched it, and it was a cool concept, and the Babadook is just a catchy name, I guess, and it was just spread very slowly but surely and became a hit.
And the visual makes for good memes, because it's such an iconic. Like you can't really confuse the Babadook with any other character, really. I mean, nothing.
The idea of a horror picture book is just so cool.
It is. It's really.
I work in a library, and I'm trying to get a copy of it and hide it somewhere.
Actually,
put it in the kids section and traumatize some kids.
Well, I don't want to create another Babadook.
Maybe
not. Oh
not.
my god, that would be funny.
But how much about the Babadook that is terrifying is because it was on a very, very small budget, so she Kent didn't have the money to do things that she might have wanted to do and see the monster more. So because it was on such a tight budget, she used her money so well and so effectively. But would it have been a different movie if she had $10 million instead of 1.5?
She said she did it deliberately that way. She deliberately chose to make it stop motion, and that was the visual she wanted. So I think if she'd had the money, it might have looked a little different, but not much. I think we would have gotten pretty much what we got.
Yeah, I can't imagine this movie being better. Like it's just the perfect realization of what it needs to be. It's small, it's intimate, it's beautifully photographed, it's atmospheric. I wouldn't change a thing about it.
And in fact, if you see the original 10-minute movie, it is a little more. First of all, you see the Babadook more percentage-wise because it's only a 9-minute movie and it's in it for maybe half of it. But you do see it actually is a little more realistic in the pre-movie than in what they eventually did. So she actually, I think, downgraded the quote-unquote realism factor when she went for the big budget movie.
It's more corporeal, like it has a face. It's more like the Ring Lady. It's one of those sort of ghosts.
Yeah.
This is much more, you don't quite understand what it is. It's just a kind of black cloak with eyeballs. It's almost comical.
Mm-hmm.
What happens with Daniel Henshaw in the end, the guy that plays the work colleague that has a crush on her?
We never see him
I
again.
think we find out.
Yeah, he gives her the flowers and then the kid freaks out and then he's gone.
That was sad.
I know, right?
It was sad. So I'm a
was.
little bit biased because I really like the actor because he was in 10 Washington Spies playing
he was cute.
Caleb Brewster, and he's very charming. And then I realized he's in Snowtown.
Don't watch Snowtown.
I'm not going to watch Snowtown. Yeah.
You either, Sarah.
Is it full of cockroaches?
No.
Very graphic.
Barrels?
Human cockroaches.
Oh, God,
Yeah.
no. Okay. No, thank you. Thanks for the warning.
But how does he go as Bunting? Like, I haven't seen him in anything where he's menacing. And
Oh, he's amazing. He's
really?
one of the greatest Australian movie villains.
Yeah, I have no idea who he even is.
Oh, wow.
It's a serial killer.
Is he?
It's a famous South Australian serial killer.
What's the name again?
That he played.
Oh.
That he played. The movie is Snowtown. It's about some murders that occurred in the 90s,
Mm-hmm.
and he plays the main role.
Because they were killing gays and stuffing their bodies in barrels.
Cool.
Yeah, South Australia. I know you're not.
All South Australians are serial killers.
Have
PSA.
Have crossovers. He can play someone who kills like one of the Priscilla girls. No.
I've met many South Australians who were not serial killers.
Yeah, I have no
Have
idea.
you?
I don't know.
I hope Jennifer Kent makes more movies. I hope she doesn't disappear. Because a lot of Australian filmmakers seem to just make 1 or 2 movies, and then they just go into producing or TV directing or something. So
I'm
Is that because we have more of a market for TV than we do for movies, though? Unless they make it really
funding
big.
from Screen Australia or state funding. So, like with this one, this was Screen Australia. And then they can't apply for funding for another year or so they can't get it multiple times in a row. Which is good because it prevents favoritism, but it also means that they have to source their own funding for their next films, which can be incredibly hard to do.
Exactly. I mean, people need money to work. So, if it takes 3 or 4 or 5 years to make a film, they're going to need to do other stuff in the meantime. And I mean, there is movie making in Australia, but it's often like it's either television or it's like foreign movies that come and film here for the tax breaks, and they sort of do work on that, or
Right.
they'll go to Hollywood and work. But like the idea of creating their own film, it seems like it's not something where Australian directors can make a big body of work like an American director. They often have to do other work in between.
Yeah.
But because we do have Screen Australia that can see things like Monsters and go, we do want to throw some cash at this because we think you're fantastic. Hopefully maybe some other funding body in the US or in Europe, or she can put on, if her next idea is fantastic and she wants to do crowdfunding, that would be available to her because of the Babadook. There are problems with it, but without it, we would be really stuffed. It would be nice to go back to like Whitlam era, free tertiary uni education and exploitation.
Yes.
Come
This
on,
was one of
Whitlam.
this is one of the funny things
Give
about
me free
not quite
uni.
Hollywood. Because they would just give money to anything, they would just make the worst movies ever made. And they got to a point where the public was like, stop funding these terrible movies. And they just sort of, the whole operation seemed to collapse. So now it's much harder to get money for movies.